Welcome to the Human Nature Channel. I'm your host, Alex Tamsul, and what am I doing here? Well, it's Wednesday morning once again here in my dad's cut-a-caper farm garage. It's great to be back. With both garage doors open, I like to think of this place as my eyes on the world, which the Human Nature Channel aspires to be. I did have trouble opening that door behind me earlier. My eyes on the world almost needed an eye patch. But if I were to take you up the hill onto the neighboring farm, you would be able to see Chestnut Ridge, part of the Appalachian mountain chain. All I can say is, you can do worse. So, there's always something interesting in my dad's garage. What can I show you tonight? I gotta back up for this. I got a pair of bolt cutters. Look at the size of this thing. Have you ever seen bolt cutters this big? I don't even know if they make them bigger than this. Ooh, this is one serious piece of hardware. You got a screw on the side. I think it adjusts the space between the blades. If Laura Loomer ever handcuffs herself to your front door, call me. So I think I got everything I need. I have these two little wind-up robots that I brought down from the house. Unfortunately, I forgot that they don't work so well. I think this one's got a busted spring. Now this one, you can wind him up and his feet move, and then you put him down and he walks a little bit and he walks and then he stops. What is this? Deleted scenes from Westworld? Have you seen Westworld? I really did enjoy season 1. Unfortunately, season 2, with its robot revolt, turned into The Outer Limits with a higher body count than El Topo, if you've ever seen that crazy midnight movie classic. Okay, boys, it's time to go see Dr. Ford. Irv dropped by with his tin cup. How you doing, Irv? He's here to remind us that man does not live by bread alone. So, what's going on there, Irv? Whoa. Did you hear that? Was that you? No, I guess not. I must be hearing things. I got my pointer with the magnet on it, which makes an interesting noise when I stick it to the boiler. Lastly, I stumbled upon this interesting bit of trivia. I have my copy of Hoffa, The Real Story by James R. Hoffa, a book that came out shortly after Jimmy was disappeared. If you open it up, you'll find that it says, as told to Oscar Fraley. Do you know who Oscar Fraley is and what else he worked on? He's the guy who co-wrote The Untouchables with Eliot Ness. Now let me show you one of my favorite true crime books. Torso, the story of Eliot Ness and the search for a psychopathic killer by Stephen Nichol. A fascinating story here. Not only does it tell you things you've probably never heard about from Ness's time with the Untouchables and his battle with Al Capone, we also learn that Ness later became Cleveland, Ohio's director of public safety and basically cleaned up one of the most corrupt cities in America in the 1940s. Cleveland back then was a city where criminals on the lam or mob guys could hide out and not worry about getting nabbed. Even the city's chief of police was on the take until Ness fired him. The twist in the story is there was a serial killer operating in Cleveland's 3rd District, more or less the city's slums, and for years nobody was able to catch this psycho despite the efforts of some tireless police detectives. Eliot Ness was not a wealthy man. In fact, after a number of disastrous business ventures, he was pretty much flat broke. Then he was approached by Oscar Fraley, who offered to co-write a memoir of his time with the Untouchables, and quite frankly, Ness needed the money. Sadly, on May 19th, 1957, Eliot Ness dies of a heart attack at the age of 54. Except for a $200 advance from his publisher, Ness would never live to see a dime. If Oscar Fraley ever approached me to write my autobiography, I'd run the other way. I had to finish this from home. I couldn't get it all done on the farm, and I decided on a do-over. This graphic should explain why. I'm not recovering from these all-nighters very well. Yeah, I know, sleep is for weaklings, but like I told Dad, there's got to be a better way. I do go up to the farm to help out, and waking up at 1 p.m. with only 5 hours of sleep is not fair to him. Anyway, let's get into it. I'd like to start off with a correction. In my last video, when I was talking about the array of photos of Brian Hodge and famous musicians, somebody I thought was Bono of U2 was actually somebody named Benji Madden. The photo wasn't very clear, and I don't even know who Benji Madden is. This is why pencils have erasers. Picking up where we left off with Brian Hodge from the last video, we should point out it's one thing to make a mistake. I just corrected one of mine. But that doesn't seem to be what's going on with Hodge. With everything I presented to you about him so far, I can't come away with any other conclusion about him except Brian Hodge is some kind of bizarro fabulator. Remember, he kept repeating that he was staying in room 32134 of Mandalay Bay. Unless the man is seriously dyslexic and can't process number symbols, which I doubt, then he went back to Australia and told deliberate falsehoods. Falsehoods that were then replicated in print and on TV. Talk about fake news. This is almost a textbook definition of it. It also bears a slight resemblance to the story about the Covington kids. Remember that one? The Covington kids story had a liar at the center of it too, a Nathan Phillips. Phillips told a story about what happened to him at a March of Indigenous Peoples at the Lincoln Memorial, where Catholic school kid Nick Sandman supposedly got in his face. Phillips told the story to the Washington Post. CNN had him on. Everything was going swimmingly for Phillips until a video of the complete event surfaced online, and it quickly became evident little of what Phillips had to say was true. In the case of Brian Hodge, it wasn't a video that tripped him up, but our intrepid cub reporter Laura Loomer, who managed to find a copy of Mr. Hodge's receipt from the Mandalay Bay, which conclusively proved that the room he was staying in was not 32134, as he had claimed over and over, but in actuality was 32314. Looking at the transposed numbers, you could almost give Hodge the benefit of the doubt that this was a case of dyslexia. But the problem with that is, considering everything that came next from the interviews he gave, it seems more likely that Hodge is some kind of pathological liar. So pathological liar could be the baseline to Hodge's story, which doesn't make him any less pathetic. You could say this silly man couldn't help himself, but even that doesn't work for me. Getting back to Nathan Phillips, a Marine Corps reservist whose job in the service was to repair refrigerators, Phillips shamelessly engaged in stolen valor. He claimed to have served in Vietnam, which was quickly shown to be untrue. He even said he was a recon scout, which is a Marine Corps occupation specialty that doesn't even exist. Which just goes to show you how fucking stupid big corporate mainstream media is, since nobody picked up on this. Phillips tried to puff himself up and make himself sound more important than he really was. Who does that remind you of? Hodge engaged in doing more or less the same thing. Now, Hodge was on the periphery of the Las Vegas shooting, obviously. He did have a room on the 32nd floor, no doubts there. But apparently that wasn't enough for him. Assuming Hodge knew he was making shit up, and I think that is a good assumption, for some reason he found the need to put himself as close to the center of the Las Vegas shooting story as possible. Being next door in a hotel room to Stephen Paddock is as close to the center as one can get. And here is what boggles my mind. It was an incredibly stupid thing to do, because the next thing that happened was the Sharks came after Brian Hodge. Personally, I can't generate any sympathy for Brian Hodge. Again, in my opinion, we are seeing another individual exploiting the Las Vegas shooting tragedy for some kind of personal gain. And that usual brand of grifter isn't so naive as Hodge appears to be. Those types are sharp enough to toss out their extrapolations based on scant evidence and then continue doing what they are doing, because in a world of short attention spans and in a world where a lot of people are eager to believe the dumbest things imaginable, it's easy to move on to the next outrage. But Hodge, I don't think he expected people to jump to the conclusion, as some have, that he was the second shooter. He didn't expect some of the torch and pitchfork crowd on social media to come after him. What a dope. So here is where the story gets away from Mr. Hodge and wanders off like Frankenstein's monster. Then where do we start with a mess like this? Actually, I think a good place to start is an article in Politico called Anatomy of a Conspiracy Theory by Keith Clore, a New York writer and adjunct professor of journalism at New York University, and we'll work backwards from that. Links will be in the notes. You can't tell the players without a scorecard, and the entire bench is present. There's Alex Jones, who got the ball rolling claiming there was Antifa literature in Paddock's room. There is retired CIA officer Brad Johnson, who I referenced in my first Las Vegas shooting video. And as an aside, I subscribe to Mr. Johnson's YouTube channel. There is Rich Higgins, former Pentagon official who served briefly as Director of Strategic Planning for the National Security Council in the White House. Laura Loomer, who needs no introduction. Jack Posobiec from One American News and soon to be the star of his own series of graphic novels. Pennsylvania Republican Congressman Scott Perry, who may have been the congressman briefed by Johnson and Higgins. Am I forgetting anybody? Oh yeah, Tucker Carlson gets sucked into this too. To set the scene, we are at a cheesecake factory in a Virginia suburb where Clore has a sit-down with Johnson and Higgins. In the course of the article, it's pretty clear Clore isn't on board with the idea that the Las Vegas shooting was really the work of a jihadist, Marxist, Antifa, globalist cabal, which would mean Stephen Paddock was the fall guy. You would also have to accept the notion that FBI management is incredibly corrupt, and while serving the will of their political overlords, management stymies the honest rank-and-file agents at every turn. My guess is Clore would probably reject that notion outright, so the subtext here is pretty clear. Conspiracy theory is a dangerous game to play and can have real-world consequences on innocent people. It would be nice if Clore actually defined innocent, but more on that later. To get a grasp of the type of thinking that motivates Johnson and Higgins, you have to step beyond the article into the 5-part True Pundit series, Fear and Lying in Las Vegas. Most of us are probably familiar with it. The kind of information presented here is always from FBI insiders and high-ranking intelligence officials. In other words, the famous anonymous sources who can never show their faces for fear of reprisal. Before I forget, there is an interesting video clip on True Pundit's 4th installment of Fear and Lies, where you see a photo of paramedics loading the wounded into an ambulance along with an audio of Hodge giving an interview to Triple M News in Melbourne, only a short time after the shooting. Here Hodge recounts what some members of his team in their rooms during the shooting related to him. I have come across the oft-repeated claim that Hodge was not at Mandalay Bay while the shooting was in progress, GPS records supposedly busting him on this. The best examples come from IntelliHub, making the claim that when Hodge made a Facebook post at 22:29, he was a minimum of 1.5 miles away or more from Las Vegas in the town of Enterprise, which is south of Vegas and the Mandalay Bay. Here is a screen grab for you to ponder. And here's another one. Do these mean anything? I don't know enough to say. But the spookiest accounting, pun intended, of Hodge's behavior comes from a site called Anonymous Conservative. It's actually a critique of the True Pundit series, starting off with a recap of True Pundit's assertions. Then it gives us a rundown of Hodge's supposed movements before, during, and after the Las Vegas shooting. Hodge purportedly had a setup at the Naughty Pine, an empty motel outside of town, as an observation post. Bad tradecraft in not also disabling geolocation on his Facebook is another claim. Oh, this stuff is pure Ian Fleming, and I don't mean chitty chitty bang bang. Getting back to Keith Clore, I think it's self-evident none of the assertions I've presented would cut much ice with him. Not only is Clore sympathetic towards Brian Hodge, Clore is eager, I might even say a little too eager, to portray Hodge as a victim. Remember what I said in my last video about the FBI memo identifying conspiracy theory as a threat to national security? Clore does the FBI one better in demonstrating that conspiracy theories not only are a parlor game for warped minds, but they do real damage. Unfortunately, Mr. Clore tells us, Hodge also made misstatements. Misstatements? I guess this was just an oopsie on Mr. Hodge's part, and look what happened. Oh, this Clore is a jerk-off. According to Clore, Hodge says an FBI agent from the Las Vegas field office called him the day after the shooting to ask him about the media statements he had made. An FBI spokesperson says the Bureau does not confirm, much less discuss, interviews with any of the witnesses in the investigation. While nothing appeared to come from the interview, Hodge found himself the subject of wild speculation on the internet in the days after the shooting. YouTubers and bloggers dissected his media appearances, raising questions about his various misstatements and assertions, all this becoming gruel for Higgins and Johnson, who examined Hodge's digital footprint on social media and, in turn, came to believe he was the go-between between ISIS and Antifa. Interesting choice of word, gruel, which is a thin liquid food of oatmeal or other meal boiled in milk or water. I'm sure it's not lost on this professor of journalism that the word rhymes with drool. The trunk of a T-bird wonders who Mr. Clore believes was behind the JFK assassination. I'll bet it's not too hard to guess. What I've been talking about here is a kind of culture war, although not the left-right divide over abortion or immigration or guns or whatever gets presented to us in the news ad nauseum. This is the type of culture war where which side you are on is determined by what you are or are not willing to consider. On YouTube, I subscribe to James Corbett of the Corbett Report. I've mentioned Corbett before. In a run-up to the recent anniversary of 9/11, Corbett has been doing a series on 9/11 whistleblowers. He's covered 5 of them in all so far, and even if you personally reject the 9/11 truther movement, you should listen to the stories of Kevin Ryan, site manager at Environmental Health Laboratories, EPA environmental scientist Dr. Kate Jenkins, Barry Jennings, Deputy Director of Emergency Services for the New York City Housing Authority, U.S. Consular Officer Michael Springman at the Jeddah Consulate in Saudi Arabia, a consulate with a history of issuing visas to terrorists at the request of the CIA, and William Rodriguez, the janitor with the master key and the last man out of the North Tower on 9/11. Rodriguez tells the story of an explosion in the sub-basement before the plane hit. I doubt these videos are the sort of thing Mr. Clore would be interested in. Clore lays the foundation of his thinking early in this article. As with conspiracy theories, he said, that have arisen in other national tragedies from 9/11 to Sandy Hook, the Vegas theory has caused measurable damage. Brian Hodge being the case in point. Clore says Hodge told him, "This is never going away. I look over my shoulder all the time now." Hodge feels that the FBI hung him out to dry, and the whole ordeal has made him distrusting and fearful. Hodge believes his phone is being tapped. Clore makes his final point. The paranoia that has overtaken him is, oddly enough, a trait I also detected in his 2 accusers. So there we have it. Paranoia. That's all it amounts to. Nothing to see here, folks, other than people with questionable mental states infecting others with their delusions. But the article is something of a dodge. The slant is sympathy for Brian Hodge. It does not seem Keith Clore bothered to actually document the degree of Brian Hodge's misstatements, which Hodge rode like a galloping horse, or even to find a parallel between Hodge and Nathan Phillips. That would undercut the entire article's point that Hodge is a victim. We should touch on one thing that Clore wisely stays away from, at least for his purposes, which is the often repeated factoid that Mary Lou Danley and Brian Hodge both worked for Gold Coast casinos in Australia at some points in their careers. Down at the bottom of Hodge's LinkedIn page, we learn Hodge was Director of Entertainment, Marketing, and Special Events. He was with Star Entertainment Group from January 2009 through February 2014, 4 years, 2 months at Gold Coast. Wikipedia tells us the Star Gold Coast, formerly Jupiter's Hotel and Casino, is a casino and hotel located in the suburbs of Broadbeach on the Gold Coast in Queensland. Jupiter's Theatre underwent a $20 million makeover and expansion and reopened in June 2012. The redevelopment of the theater resulted in the capacity more than doubling to accommodate 2,000 seated or 2,300 general admission guests. I think it's a safe bet Mr. Hodge was involved in that and likely had his hands full. Nobody that I know of has ever placed Hodge and Mary Lou Danley in the same room. Admittedly, they work for the same outfit, but casino floor and theater are their own separate workspaces, and since Mary Lou's LinkedIn page has been taken down, I can't find if they ever worked at Gold Coast at the same time. If anybody has anything more specific than that, please leave a comment. But like I said, both Mary Lou and Hodge did work for Gold Coast, and it seems reasonable that their work histories overlapped, even if it's not clear for how long. Let's say it's true they were working inside the same hotel at the same time. Clure, in his article, misses a delicious irony here. One, he'd have to spend too much time explaining away, but an irony nevertheless. Hodge, in his zeal to explain how he found himself in a dangerous situation and lived to tell about it, unwittingly placed himself in a room next to a mass shooter whose girlfriend was somebody also employed at one time by Gold Coast. A coincidence that originally started, over 1,300 miles away down under? That might have made Mr. Clure's article run too long. When it comes to presentations of the Las Vegas shooting, or any other mass casualty event for that matter, I ask if the theories are believable or convincing. By that yardstick, I find Mike Turber believable and John Cullen I do not. I've worked for engineers. I'm not a math guy, but I can understand when someone clearly explains calculations in the plain English. I'm a language guy, and I can do a linguistic analysis to beat the band. When I listen to guys like Brad Johnson or Rich Higgins, linguistically it sounds like they are tossing in too much to be completely believable, as if they are throwing a lot of stuff against the wall to see if any of it sticks. A Marxist, jihadist, Antifa, globalist nexus? Too many moving parts if you ask me. Nowadays, I wonder if agenda is more important than a what really happened scenario. Like I said about Cullen in a comment exchange one time, I'm not saying he's wrong, I'm saying he's not particularly believable. If I take his data and find a more believable middle ground, it's live by Occam's razor, die by Occam's razor, buddy. I didn't start writing this article until late last Monday, which meant I had to type like a fiend to get a first draft done. But I wanted to wait and read some comments from my last video for some insights and ideas. Once again, one of my indispensable partners in all of this is Eric Peters. I'll show you an exchange between us that pretty much sums up where my head is at on all of this for now. Eric, I think the report trying to link Hodge with ISIS is a disgrace. Take a good look at Hodge and ask yourself, does he look like an ISIS terrorist? Me. I'll tell you what. I'm still trying to keep an open mind about the Hodge story, and I'm going to give his accusers at least a fair hearing, just to see if anything they say holds water. Now, does Hodge look like an ISIS terrorist? Of course not. But I had a Jewish friend, since deceased, who explained to me the concept of the non-defiling infidel. These are Christians or Jews who, for whatever reason, have thrown in with the terrorists. And as far as the terrorists are concerned, these folks are A-OK. Also, it's not unheard of for intelligence agencies to use people in the entertainment industry for their own purposes. The actress Bo Derek, in her autobiography, tells a story of wearing a wire for the CIA to catch some Mark Rich-style businessman selling contraband to a rogue state in defiance of sanctions. It's a murky world when you get into the intelligence biz. Up is down and down is up. Let's see if I find anything. Eric, I look forward to your analysis and certainly don't want to interfere with it. Just giving you my opinion as it stands on the question whether Hodge could be an ISIS terrorist, which was the direction this so-called intelligence report was taking. I have not thought about the question if Hodge could have been a CIA agent. Me, or not necessarily CIA, and not an agent but an asset. Australia, like any other country, has its intelligence services too, and all intelligence agencies use people. There's one Australian actor I can think of, an Academy Award winner, who gives me the willies. And like I told Truthseeker in a comment on her video Hodgepodge, could Brian Hodge have been what you call eyes on the ground? I don't know one way or the other, but I will say this. Something about Brian Hodge seriously does not pass the stink test. So that's it for now. I may have to skip vids for the next 2 weeks. I got a lot of life maintenance stuff to take care of. Plus, I need to catch up on my reading, and there's a lot of other Las Vegas shooting creators videos I'd like to watch. Of course, I may do a short piece You never know. And starting in October, I plan on coming back bigger, better, and badder than ever. Anyhow, I hope this video gave you enough food for thought until we meet again. Oh, and the song. Well, I couldn't get to it. But as I record this, I am getting ready to head up to the farm, and I'll do it up there. It'll be the next video I post. Have a good one.